Welcome everyone to Congregation L'Dor Va-Dor's weekly program, Chat with Two Rabbis. It is July 20th, Tuesday evening. And with us, we have Rabbi Barry Silver, the spiritual leader of Congregation L'Dor Va-Dor, of course. Thank you, Rabbi. And as our guest, we have Rabbi Loring J with us from All Peoples Synagogue. And I'll let you rabbis take it away. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. Thank you, everybody, for joining in.
Thanks a lot, Sharon, for orchestrating this. It's always a pleasure to be with you. And it's great to be with Rabbi Frank. I think he has one of the best backgrounds of anyone I've seen on Zoom, mostly because his father was the architect of it and was also the architect of a very engaging brand of Judaism that he passed along to his son Loring. And we're going to be chatting about the Torah passage this week, as well as current events and anything that anyone else would like to speak about. So the Torah passage this coming Friday is called Va-Etchannon, which means, and Moses pleaded, he was pleading with God to let him into the promised land. But as you know, God was rather harsh and said, no, you messed up. Nobody's perfect, so you're not going to make it. I'm going to turn it over to Loring to see what his pleasure is. Rabbi Frank, would you like to kick off the discussion? Do you want me to, or you want to say a few words? And I'll turn it over to you to take it away.
First, I want to welcome everyone. Shalom, shalom, Baruch haba, B'Shem Adonai. Blessed are you, all the wonderful peoples at L'Dor Va-Dor. God willing, one of these days, maybe next week, I'll invite my congregation to join in and Zoom in also, so we can have two synagogues joining in together and be able to pass and spread the spiritual word of our Judaism to many people, to all peoples, and to L'Dor Va-Dor from generation to generation. What a beautiful Torah portion it is. It reminds me in particular of a lot of stories that come up. One in particular, of course, the 10 Commandments. And also to throw it out to the congregation, some questions that I'd like to pose. I know Rabbi Silver would like to pose also, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But generally speaking, it's one of my favorite Torah readings because of the fact that the 10 Commandments, the Shema is in the 10 Commandments and in the Torah reading of this week. And also it's about receiving of the Torah, the 10 Commandments, if you will, from God, if you will, God, or Mount Sinai, or an inspiration from our ancestors. So I'd like to pose some questions to our congregation as we're discussing this along the way, so we can feedback and hear what they say. There's an interesting story. Barry, do you I can have a minute for a little story? There's a little story.
You got 2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay. There's a story which I imagine some of our congregants know already about how is it says in this Torah reading that we were chosen of all peoples to receive the word of God, if you will, or the inspiration, the 10 Commandments or the actual Torah. How is it that we were chosen out of all the others? Sometimes when I ask people, do you know that the Jewish people are the chosen people? And they say, yes, we're the chosen people. And I say, well, wait a minute, how do you know we are chosen, and why do you assume that we are the chosen one? Well, there's a story that goes, and I'm sure many of us know it already, but just to reiterate, God says to himself, it's an analogy, and it's hopefully an inspiration. God says to the people, I have something I want to give you to make you a better people, because supposedly God looked over creation and saw humanity and said, I think I can make my creation, my human beings, a better people. Let me give them a set of laws and rules and regulations that would make them a better people. And of course, we know it's the 10 Commandments and so on and so forth, and a variety of other, depending upon how you believe the whole Torah, if you will. So God goes to the largest nation around the world. It might have been, say, the Tsar of Russia. It might have been the Emperor of China. It might have been the Pharaoh of Egypt. And goes to each one of them individually. I have a set of laws and rules and regulations that will make you a better people. And so the Pharaoh says, what are they? And God says, 10 Commandments. What are they? Well, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not murder, and goes on. And the Pharaoh says, stop, hold on. We can't take these laws. That's how we make a living. That's how we conquer the nations. Next the Emperor of China, same thing. No, we can't take them. We can't take them. We cannot follow them. It'd be impossible. Finally, going down the list, reaching Moses at Sinai, I have something I want to give you. And Moses says, I'll take it, without even asking what it is. So there's a beautiful story behind that. So are we the chosen because we're chosen last? Does that mean we're the chosen people? Actually, we were just kind of like the last person that God would ever be able to present the Torah to, or the laws and rules to, because there's no one else. We were just a wandering people in the desert, no flag, no rallying cry or whatever. And Moses says, we'll take it. Now that we've taken it, and Barry knows the expression in Hebrew, what are they? And so God goes on to say, well, 10 commandments. And so in essence, we've already accepted that we would take them. So now we have this big responsibility to now pass them on to the world to make them a better people. So it's an interesting story, but the underlying thought behind that, if your parents said to you, Rabbi Silver, to L'Dor Va-Dor congregation, I have something I want to give you, you would probably say, okay, Dad, okay, Mom, I'll take it. But if a stranger on the street asks you or says to you, I have something I want to give you, you probably run away. I don't want them. Well, God was a stranger to all those emperors, if you will, or pharaohs. But to Moses, God was very in part of his inherent being. And whatever God has for you, we accept. It's like your parents saying, son, I want you to do this, daughter, I want you to do that. You accept it and you just go along with it, generally speaking. So just a little thing to open up the discussion. That's our Torah reading today. A variety of other, things. By the way, there's something in there about no idol worshiping. And I need to pinch myself because I worship and I idolize Rabbi Barry Silver, but we're not allowed to have idols. So I hold off on that.
Well, I appreciate your idle speculation about that, Rabbi Frank.
Also, we can't idolize a car or something that we have material. We have to idolize, if you will, God or our spiritual being and our family, and more important.
Hey, well, thank you very much for your explanation and for the kind compliment, which I don't deserve, but I appreciate it. Let me share a few thoughts also about the 10 Commandments. The way my dad explained the 10 Commandments is that God went to the Egyptians and said, I got some commandments. Said, what's in it? Well, you got to observe a Sabbath day. And I'm not interested. He went to the Assyrians, says, got some commandments. What's in it? Well, you can't take the name of the Lord in vain. I'm not interested. He goes to Moses. He goes, I got some commandments. Moses says,
how much is it?
How much do they cost? God says, they're free. He goes, oh, wow, I'll take 10 of them. So that's how I understood it to be. Of course, in the Torah, the reason why they say that the Jews were the chosen ones was because of the faith of Abraham, specifically his willingness to sacrifice his child warranted God extending a covenant to him and then throughout his generations. As far as Jewish people accepting whatever they were given by God, the Jews are rather cantankerous. So the Reform movement came along and said, well, not really. We don't accept that all of this came from God. Then the Reconstructionists came along and said, we think each generation has to enter into a covenant with God. We don't necessarily accept the past. The past has a vote, but not a veto. Then the humanists came along and said, we don't accept any of this God stuff. And so the interesting thing about being Jewish is that we question things and we evolve and we adapt. And I think that's why we're highly successful. We don't just accept whatever we're given, we grapple with it. And that's what Israel's all about, struggling with God. And the 10 Commandments are a very interesting part of the Torah, but I don't think they're the most interesting. I think it's fascinating to look at what's not in the 10 Commandments. God does not say anything in the commandments about slavery. There's nothing in there saying that you can't own slaves. There's nothing in the 10 Commandments saying that you can't abuse children or you shouldn't beat children or your wife. There's nothing in the commandments that you shouldn't practice genocide. Nothing in the commandments saying that you shouldn't rape and murder. And some have pointed out the reason is because all of those things were commanded to be done by God. God ordained and commanded the Jews to commit murder, rape, genocide, and other crimes against other peoples And therefore, he didn't want to prescribe it in the 10 Commandments because it was part of what he was ordering the Jews to do, which is one reason why movements like the Reform, Reconstructionists, L'Dor Va-Dor came along, because we've come a long way since then. There's also something else very interesting in this passage where Moses is speaking to the Jewish people, and he has something in there that is contained in Christian scripture, Muslim scripture, and a lot of other similar scriptures. It says, you shall not add anything to these laws, nor shall you subtract anything. Nothing shall be added or subtracted. Why was that put in? Because whoever wrote it was worried that some joker would come along next year and say, hey, you know all the stuff that's in there? Forget about it. I got something new. So they wanted to make sure it was going to last. So they said, you can't add or subtract. So what do the Orthodox do? They come up with the Talmud. I mean, the Talmud adds volumes to Jewish law, and they come up with the Shulchan Aruch. They come up with something that they fabricated called the oral law, which is a whole body of law that's totally added on. And then a whole bunch is subtracted, because all the animal sacrifices, they say, well, you don't really have to do that. We don't have a temple anymore. And the part about executing women if they're not virgins and disrespectful kids, you don't have to do that. So a whole bunch of stuff is added and subtracted. The difference between modern Jews and the fundamentalists of the Orthodox is we acknowledge this growth and this development and adaptation and try to channel it through reason. And the Orthodox claim that they're still following God's law, but they have a few exceptions along the way.
Rabbi, sir, isn't that what our country is based upon the same? We have the Constitution, then we have amendments to them. And then the amendments allude to the issues that you're speaking about. We have the Bill of Rights. So we added on to it too. There's no reason why you can't, keep on changing and amending as long as you have the vote of the people.
Right, except if you said that God wrote the Constitution, then adding to it would seem like it's sacrilegious. But you're exactly right. America has a great system of democracy because we're able to add, and it's flexible, and that's why modern Judaism is very successful and has produced some great outcomes. I will say this also about the 10 Commandments. It's not so much what's in the 10 Commandments that's so significant. Every culture, every people, every group says you shouldn't murder, you shouldn't commit theft, and you shouldn't lie. They all have it. What's unique about the Jewish scriptures is two. One, it gives a day of rest to animals and considers animals to be worthy of dignity and fair treatment. It also provides a day of rest for the servants, for women, for everyone who didn't normally have legal status. It tries to, in its way, give freedom and take into account the dignity of all people. And it demonstrates the need to have a moral code. And the moral code might be different today than it was before, but the Jewish people have always been at the forefront of morality and ethics and teaching a moral code, and the need to have a moral code with principles that seemingly come from a divine source. And we should take great pride in that. And we might want to ask, if we were writing the 10 Commandments today, very interesting question is, what commandments would you come up with that you think would be worthy of the top 10? Like for me, I might not put in there, thou shalt not covet. That's kind of like a thought crime, not such a big deal. And it kind of kills the capitalistic spirit. Well, hey, I want to acquire this or that. I would put in something about treating the planet with dignity and treating children with respect and helping those who are being oppressed. And there's some great things in later Jewish scripture that I think surpasses 10 Commandments. I think that probably one of the most sublime things in the Torah, which doesn't appear in the 10 Commandments, if you see someone suffering and the rest of the people are doing nothing, speak up. Don't follow a crowd to do evil. And even if you see an animal suffering under its burden of your enemy that you hate, and you're inclined to say, good, I want to see that animal suffer. It says, resist that urge. Be kind, be compassionate, and don't follow the crowd to do evil, but speak up. That is I believe, the quintessential, most important commandment of all. And that's what it really means to be Jewish. Not to do what everyone else is doing.
Rabbi Silver, in essence,
Yes.
I want you to continue on, of course, but in essence, how can one have compassion for animals, or even take it even further, compassion for human beings, when we are eating them, abusing them, factory farming, and going along with what's happening? And we are part of the culture of that. And when we eat an animal with all the, if you will, the fear and the adrenaline that was going in when they were being slaughtered, it makes us, in a sense, similar in thinking. So most people who are vegetarians or vegans, if you will, and some of the great scholars feel that that's the first step in obtaining a sense of compassion for human beings and for others. So I've been a vegan, 99% vegan, no dairy, no eggs, no meat, once in a while maybe a piece of fish, for many years. And I think it has ultimately changed my whole outlook on how I view other people, animals, and so on. I do have compassion on anyone who, even those who eat meat and so on, and dairy products, but I do have a sense of being able to have, in my opinion, a sense of compassion beyond what those who partake in those animal products.
Yeah, well, I agree with you in that your diet involves moral decision making. So when people keep kosher, they say, "Oh, I'm kosher, so I know that I'm Jewish." If you're vegan or vegetarian, you're doing that because you know that you want to be compassionate.
We're kosher automatically, aren't we?
Right. Yeah. I believe that if we follow Jewish principles and not just mindless ritual practices, it would move us towards a vegan diet, because I think that's what the Torah was all about. It was trying to teach us to have compassion. In the biblical days, you could say they weren't capable of it because perhaps they didn't understand nutrition and they didn't have enough other food sources. But today, there's certainly no reason for it. And you could say that there's a lot of things that you can do to show Jewish ideals and Jewish values. And I would say that that would be one that also has a benefit for the planet. So
Barry,
I didn't realize when I brought Loring on that he was going to be a confederate of mine on this particular topic.
No, but I was going to say, isn't the Torah, quote unquote, Torah, if you will, written, whatever who it is, the first part of the Torah, the first few chapters speak about, I've given you every plant and seed bearing and fruit and vegetable to eat. And that's what, nothing about animals in that part, but only out of a kind of a concession that God says, okay, if you must eat an animal, at least kill it humanely. And that the kosher laws were based upon that. By the way, if anyone wants to have a debate about being vegan or not vegan, I'm the president of the Kosher Nostra, so I can dictate to you what I recommend to eat.
Yeah, and in idyllic days in Eden, human beings were vegetarian, and it's also said that in the world to come, when things become perfected, we'll return to that diet. I don't want to beat a dead horse, if you'll pardon the expression, with the vegetarianism. So maybe we can take on any questions, comments from other people, and then we can talk about current events. So does anybody have any thoughts they'd like to share about the Torah reading, or any comments that Rabbi Frank and I have made, or any of your own?
I hope we haven't turned anybody off by saying veganism, because sometimes people say, when you say I'm vegan, they say, well, where do you get your protein?
Put it in the chat.
Go
Put
ahead.
it in the chat. Put it in the.
I see on the Zoom Cantor Glenn Sherman, someone who is very prominent in this community and has been active in the Jewish community for a very long time. And you've now been subjected to a vegetarian rant by two rabbis. Maybe Cantor Sherman could add a little balance to this. Cantor Sherman, you want to weigh in on this topic, or any other ones of your choice?
Thank you, rabbis. One question that's always been bothered me, and with the 10 Commandments, is the sin of the golden calf. How could the Israelites be guilty of building an idol before they got the 10 Commandments that told them not to build an idol?
Because it was already by Abraham. Abraham already had that belief in God, if you will, or faith in God, and not an idol.
I heard that, but I still don't know how the Israelites 430 years later remembered
I'll
Abraham.
tell you how. It's very important, because Judaism, if you will, or God was in their hearts. And when it's in your heart, you don't need to study or practice or go to synagogue. It's in your heart. And it was passed down L'Dor Va-Dor from generation to generation. And after 400 years of slavery, it's remarkable that the Israelites, if you will, still had that within them to have a faith in God.
Yeah, I just want to comment on your question, which I think is a very excellent question, Karen Sherman. I don't believe that the reason why God got so bent out of shape and punished the Jews was because they were violating the 10 Commandments, because you raise a very good point. They couldn't have. And there was no necessarily strict prohibition about taking other gods. It wasn't set down in stone, so to speak. I think the reason why God came down hard on them, and as you know, I don't take it literally, but following the storyline, it's because what incensed God was like, hey, you know what? I did all these things for you. I did all these miracles. I did the 10 plagues. I fed you with manna. I opened up the sea. You come out, and Moses is going for a little while, and all of a sudden you're worshiping another calf. It's not that you violated the 10 Commandments. It's like, you are just so disloyal to me that I'm gonna zap you. And Moses took the most valuable item that he could possibly have, the 10 Commandments, and smashed them. Like, that seems like sacrilege right there. But you raised a very good question, Candace Sherman. Candace Sherman, did you want to mention anything else about your thoughts on what we have been talking about so far? Because I'd love to get your take on all this.
Well, my whole point of Shavuos and eating dairy was because the Israelites had no clue what to eat. They didn't have the Torah yet. So they had a little blintzes.
That's probably right.
What about the manna?
I love
The manna was vegan food, manna.
Manna is like the first pastrami. It's fantastic, okay? I love manna.
Candace Sherman, tell everybody a little bit about your background.
Well, thank you for asking, Rabbi. I'm the 7th cantor in my family.
Wow.
I'm here is because my grandfather left Poland in 22, became the cantor in the New World in Toronto in 1922, and wouldn't you know it, we're here. Thank God for that.
Beautiful.
I've been a cantor in many different synagogues in Palm Beach Gardens and Pembroke Pines, and I do destination bar mitzvahs. That's my other thing that I do. I love doing them.
And you've also gone on a cruise or two, right?
That's correct. That's where I met you the first time. I started what I figured was a pretty good business. I started doing bar mitzvahs on cruise ships because grandparents can actually spend a week with their kids, with their grandkids, without having to, see them for 3 seconds and run away. And it was a good business until COVID. And then everything changed a little bit, but it's all good. Life is good. And Judaism is still in my heart.
What do you think about the future of Judaism? Like, where are we heading? Do you have any thoughts on that?
That's a good question. I think we're heading in a situation where you and I were talking the other day of breaking down the barriers between reform and conservative and all these, what kind of Jew are you and what kind of Jew are you? And I'm a Jew who loves being Jewish. I love my God. I love the Sefer Torah. I don't like all the rules and regulations, but that's okay. And I don't like all the holidays. I like a lot of holidays. Like yesterday was Tisha B'Av, the day before. That should have been Holocaust Day. We're remembering the days when we lost the temple, but we lost 6 million people. We need a fast day for the Holocaust. We need to elevate the holiday.
Yeah. Well, Candace Sherman, it sounds like you'd feel pretty much at home at what we do, because somebody told me, I don't believe in organized religion. So I said, well, come over to our place. We're very disorganized. So we believe in getting everybody under one roof also. That's why we do a lot of these discussions, because we like to hear different points of view. And it's really sad, like, oh, I can only hang out with other Jewish people in a synagogue if they agree with me on everything.
Exactly.
You know, it's like, we're already such a small minority of people. Why would we want to further fractionalize and divide ourselves by only hanging out with another group of people? So at L'Dor Va-Dor, we have Orthodox, we have non-Jews, we have all types of people on, and we're trying to really get all Jews under one roof. So I'm glad to hear you say that. And we also are interspecies. So I like that you have your dog there.
That's
good.
good.
It's great.
He's got God with him. Dogs spelled by God, right?
He's I adopted him. He's a rescue.
Oh, wonderful.
But he actually rescued me. And he came with the name of Slim, and I changed it to Slim Shalom. That's his name.
Slim Shalom.
Slim Shalom. So Vat Bracha.
Do you sing Slim Shalom to him? Anybody else want to share some comments?
Yes.
Rabbi.
Yeah.
Sandy and Arnie Pickholtz want to ask a question. Go ahead.
Oh, good. Okay.
Where are they?
They're on. Hold on.
Oh,
Go ahead, Arnie.
Where is Arnie? Yeah, where are you, Arnie?
Hey, everybody. We're up here in the top of a mountain in North Carolina.
There you are.
Purifying ourselves. I just wanted to make one comment. I've been writing a little bit about, some of the things that are happening in the world today. And Rabbi, you mentioned something about the idea of covet not being, one of the heavies in the Ten Commandments. But from my viewpoint, it's the big one. I really think that part of the reason why humanity is so unjust is that we live in a covetous world. We live in a world where people are looking at other people's money, other people's property, other people's stuff, and they want it too, and they want it too. And I think part of the gift that Judaism has given us, at least is given to me, is and Rabbi, you have talked about this a lot, is the fact that we are individuals. The individuality, what makes us special as thinking people, as judicious people, as people who are righteous. And I think I don't know why the covet thing was, I think it was 9th or 10th. Which one was it, Rabbi? You remember?
Yeah, it goes at the end.
It goes at the end. And for my money, it should be at the beginning with a pretty severe explanation of exactly. I don't think the average person understands what to covet, what they're talking about there. So I just want to make that comment. Here I am on top of a mountain, thinking about those things and looking at the rest of civilization down below me, and realizing that a lot, the covet commandment is a very heavy one.
Well, Arnie, I know why you came up with this one about covet, because you're emulating Moses. Moses climbed up to the top of the mountain, and that's where he received the commandments. So you're like in sync with him, and you've made a believer out of me, Arnie. I didn't think that covet should be in the top 10, but after listening to you, I think it might be right up there. So you've made a believer out of me. And I just find it kind of odd that it says, like, don't covet your neighbor's wife. It's obviously written from a male perspective. Like, well, what about your neighbor's husband? It's written from a male chauvinist point of view. But I have to say, Arnie, that you're very convincing. And okay, I'll go along with that. I think we could put it up there, because that is very significant. Also, it is very important that we should say, thou shalt not covet, COVID. And the way that you can avoid coveting is by getting a vaccine. So we could say, thou shalt not covet, go get your vaccine. But that's COVID. Anybody else have anything that they'd like to share before we move on to the all exciting and controversial current events? Go ahead, Sharon.
You had done a list of top 10 commandments, replacement commandments. Maybe you'd like to read those off, Rabbi, because some of them were, and besides the environment, there were some other things that were really key about the ones that you read that time.
Andrew's desk.
Yeah, well, I do appreciate your mentioning that. I don't have them in front of me,
Oh.
and I'm not that organized that I could get them at the drop of a hat. But I do recall one of them was something like, don't believe things based on authority, based on evidence. Always keep your mind open to new ideas, and always be willing to discuss things with everybody, things of that nature. But I will fish those out sometime and find them, because I do think it's a good exercise for us to come up with commandments today that seem to make sense. And the other one is also, if you live in a democracy, educate yourself and vote and know what you're doing. I mean, just a lot of people take what we have for granted in this country. This country is incredible, but it's only as good as we make it. And our decisions are only as good as our knowledge allows. So take advantage of being in a democracy. You know, maybe you're not of age to go fight in a war, but go educate yourself and get out and vote and take an interest. But thanks. Anybody else? Go ahead, Sharon.
So the only thing, I know that you've pointed this out at other times, but the 10 commandments are in this sedra, as well as the Shema, and they're in another area of the Torah as well. I think Leviticus for Shema.
Yeah, and the
Ten Commandments are in Exodus. So, but can you tell us the differences that you see in the writings in Deuteronomy versus the original ones, perhaps between you and Rabbi Frank?
Yeah, there are differences between the commandments. Most of them are rather superficial, but it does give us an indication that it's not of divine origin. Otherwise, it normally would have been the same, unless God, like after Moses smashed him, said, hey, I can do better than that, let me try it again. But there are differences. The main difference, which is kind of interesting, the most significant one, is that in one it says, don't honor your father and mother, and the order is switched. In one it's father and mother, then the other it's mother and father. The other one is
the reward behind it too. Not just superficially, there's a reward that goes on. It says, if you honor your mother and your father, then you have a reward. The only commandment that gives you a reward, that is, you'll live long in the land that God has given you, I've given you, and you will you'll be prosperous. By the way, I just happen to have 10 commandments written by my father. Just happen to have it across them. These are 10 commandments for us. Now, obviously, this is not written by God, but it was inspired by God, because these are 10 commandments inspired by my father. They're very interesting, if I do say so myself. Number 1, 10 commandments for parents. Thou shalt earn your children's respect and not acquire it through fear. There's an explanation behind that. Number 2, thou shalt not recreate your life through your children. There's an explanation about that. Number 3, thou shalt give your children every opportunity to expand and express their individual personality and not smother their growth. Number 4, remember your children are human and have feelings, emotions, and problems as serious to them as to your own. Number 5, thou shalt return understanding and instruction, not recrimination, when your children confide in you. Let them feel comfortable in knowing they can turn to you for encouragement. Do not frighten them away. Number 6, thou shalt teach by respect and precept and example, serving as a model and not a critic for your children. Number 7, thou shalt not seek perfection from your children. Number 8, thou shalt keep your word and thereby teach your children the infinitesimal worth of honor. And number 9, thou shalt not shield your children from the realities of life. And the last commandment, thou shalt teach your children there is a right and a wrong, and that God, not man, is the yardstick.
That's very good. That's
It goes on
really
with a
good.
beautiful explanation. But I just thought, by the way, the other thing, when we say that we are Jewish, that implies you really aren't formally a complete Jew. And if someone says to be an appointment at 5 o'clock, it's 5 o'clock. If someone says 5-ish, it's like, oh, a little before or after. But if you ask someone who's Catholic or Baptist or Presbyterian, they never say I'm Catholic-ish. I'm Catholic. So why can't we say I'm Jew? I think we have to have more confidence in who we are as a people and say Jewish. You know, someone says I'm Catholic-ish, it implies that, okay, you're not really 100% Catholic, or you don't really follow the Catholicism ethics, if you will, but maybe part of them.
Yeah, well,
How do you all
that's
feel about that?
and that's a good homily. Although sometimes you can have ish and it doesn't. Sometimes it means somewhat, and other times it doesn't. Like you have Irish, Yiddish, British. So it's also a suffix that's used just to give an identifier. But the homily is very good. I like it. Is there anyone else who would like to share a few words? Oh, the other difference to answer your question, Sharon.
Homily?
Yeah, Sharon, to answer your question also is that the reason for the Sabbath day is different in both versions. In one, it's the Exodus from Egypt, and in the other, it's creation. And so in the Kiddush and in Shabbat, you see the same type of thing, where Shabbat is the explanation is because of the of creation and the Exodus from Egypt, which really reminds us that what Shabbat is really all about is freedom. The Exodus from Egypt is freedom, and freedom of thought, and freedom to be who we want to be. Freedom is so important. And creation reminds us of how lucky we are to be on a magnificent earth with all of creation and to appreciate creation. Both of those things are really the essence of Shabbat.
And Shabbat isn't just normally just one day, maybe for the weekly day, but there's also a sabbatical year and a time for let the soil rest, not just plowing the fields. Let the soil rest and regroup, if you will, and regenerate. So Sabbath applies to a lot of different aspects of life, not just the seventh day.
Yeah. Go ahead, Harris.
Unmute yourself first, honey.
Okay.
Everything okay?
Yeah, you can hear me, right?
Yeah. Hi, Harris.
Okay. Hi. A lot of people think the word Jew is derogatory. And that's with the Goyim and the Jew. And that's why everybody says Jewish. If you call somebody a Jew, it could be derogatory.
But it's
And
not.
that's a known, it's not, but that's a known fact.
Right.
Right. Well, like, for example, one of my friends, he says, you're a Jew. And I don't take it in that way. It's just I'm a Catholic, or I'm Catholic, I'm Presbyterian, you're a Jew. He doesn't mean it in a derogatory way, but we take it because we don't necessarily refer to ourselves as, quote, a Jew. We say I'm Jewish. And I think it's a commentary of how we feel. I'm a Jew. Let's say it with strength and with vigor and confidence. I'm a Jew, or I'm Jew.
Yeah. Well, Harris, of course, you're 100% correct that for many, many centuries, people have used Jew to mean something derogatory. And so a lot of Jewish people would be hesitant to say, I'm a Jew. Many people don't know this, but in Christian literature, the betrayer of Jesus was referred to as Judas. The whole thing's fabricated, but Judas is Latin for the Jew. So the one who was a traitor and turned in the Son of God to be crucified is the Jew. And throughout history, the Jew has been vilified. So it takes on, in the minds of many, a negative connotation. It's not that the word Jewish, there's denotation and connotation. The denotation is, what does a word literally mean? It literally means someone who ascribes to the Jewish faith. The connotation among many is something very negative. And so that's why they don't want to self-identify. Yes. But I agree with what Rabbi Frank is saying, that I think it's really important for us to counter anti-Semitism by saying, I'm proud to be Jewish,
Right.
and here's why, and by making contributions and by sharing with other people the beauty of being Jewish. Sometimes we don't do that because we kind of like keep Judaism to ourselves. Wouldn't be a bad idea to invite non-Jewish people to our synagogue, to our Zoom, to our activities, so that people can see what we're all about, and to try to erase that negative.
By the way, when we
connotation.
say that we're not segregationists, you know, that we're more like incorporating all peoples. But when you go to a church or a synagogue, it's segregated automatically just by the people that usually attend. Obviously, it's nice to be able to bring peoples from all places, L'Dor Va-Dor, and all peoples into our houses of worship, not just Jews or Christians.
Yeah. Which also raises another interesting question. There's a lot of synagogues that have non-Jewish people who are singing some songs that they might not even understand. Some synagogues think, no, you should have Jewish singers because they're the spiritual leaders. Others think, well, it's just a song, so who's ever doing it doesn't really matter.
I know
That's
in
another-
our synagogue, like I'm sure yours, the choir consisted of many people who were all different religions, you know. But also when you think about this, if you say that you want to make funeral arrangements and you go to a cemetery, it's like a Jewish cemetery, they will not, some of them will now, they will not allow a non-Jew to be buried in that cemetery unless that person converts. I've done many conversions, quick conversions for people who said, Rabbi, my husband and I want to make an arrangement to have a plot in this particular cemetery. I mean, I can name one in particular, Mount Sinai down in North Miami area, and they will not allow a non-Jew to be there unless that person can prove he's Jewish. So I've done many conversions, quick conversions, so people can have a burial plot next to their husband or wife.
Yeah. You know, I am interested in finding out from people what you think about the new rules that are going to go into effect in Florida, requiring children to recite the Pledge of Allegiance under God and learning about our Judeo-Christian heritage. We'll be taking that up a bit more tomorrow, but I just thought maybe someone might want to comment on some of these things, or anything else that's going on in the world today. Any takers on that? Go ahead, Harris.
Well, in the Middle East, Lebanon has been firing rockets at Israel. They haven't hit anything, and the Lebanese army wasn't aware of it. So it's the Israelis think it's part of Iran, and Hezbollah is firing the rockets. But thank God they didn't hit anything.
Yeah.
And things are pretty bad in Lebanon right now. The country is really suffering economically, and also in Iran. Iran, 50% of the people are living in poverty, and they're getting food from outside. And I just hope it keeps up in Iran.
I think the
Yeah.
Iranian people really have always been dear friends of Israel, particularly when they're referred to as
Yes.
Persian.
Yes,
And it's just the leaders that have changed. Like someone saying, Germans are, Jew haters, when it wasn't the Germans, it was just the leader. Obviously, the leader got a lot of them to go along with it. But
yeah.
I think Iran is a phenomenal country, and it was great friends of Israel. And it would be nice to have the leadership there changed around, just like in some place like Venezuela. It's
Yes.
Well, the problem is that when you have,
I
ahead,
just want
Harry.
to say that people that wanted to get out of Iraq went to Iran because they were very friendly to Jews. And
Yeah.
then when the government changed and became very religious, that changed everything. There's still a small Jewish population living in Iran, and I believe they live there very peacefully. But I would hope someday that there would be a change in government in Iran, but I don't see it because of the Iranian army is so aligned with the government. So I think it's going to stay like this.
yeah.
Maybe
I do-
Israel has an underhanded or a overhanded idea as to how to make that happen, God willing.
Yeah, I do want to turn it over to Rachel, because I think Rachel, if I see correctly, I think her hand is up to want to speak. Is that correct?
Yep.
Go ahead, Rachel.
Rachel,
Rachel, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going back to the Pledge of Allegiance. It
Yes.
originally did not have under God in it. It got put in during the McCarthy era to try and, quote, weed the communists out. So the way our parents said it when they were younger didn't have under God. So I think
Interesting.
we should go back to the original way of saying it.
Do you think we should go back to the original way of saying it without under God in it?
Yeah. Mhm.
Why? What do you see?
Because
Perceive as-
God and the government aren't supposed to go hand in hand.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more about that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Harris.
I think one thing they should put in American history is slavery, so everybody knows what went on. When I went to school, nobody ever talked about slavery. It was never in our history, and I think they should put it in our history.
Wait, what state did you grow up in, Harris?
I'm from Philadelphia.
Well, I'm from Virginia, and it was all over our textbook, slavery and, the Confederacy and so on, but not held up in a high regard. It was obviously we defeated, segregationists. And also, too, some of the great politicians, if you want to call them great, like Senator Byrd, was a segregationist at KKK, and he had an epiphany toward the end of his life. I made a mistake, and I disregard what I did before in the past, and please forgive me. Same way with Governor Wallace, the same thing.
Yeah, Governor Wallace did the same thing. I remember he went into a black church and he apologized.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, that's why I'm saying that, now I'm just as a thought, when you take down these statues, okay, and first they're taken down illegally, I don't agree with, but if you take down a statue, maybe those Confederate people, if you will, or people had an epiphany later in life and turned around. So it's almost like someone saying, well, let's tear down Auschwitz because it's a eyesore, if you will, or it's like reminds us of how bad people are. No Jew would ever say tear down Auschwitz and forget about it.
Right.
Yeah. Well, there's a difference between having a reminder of past atrocities and glorifying someone who supported slavery and led an insurrection against the United States government. I mean,
but what about the President of the United States? What about George Washington? I mean,
no,
tear down his place, because the slave quarters are right down next to his home.
No, I think that most people would agree that we need to preserve Auschwitz and other examples of atrocities. But if you were to put up a statue of Hitler in the middle of the town square, somebody would probably disagree. There's a way of remembering our history without necessarily honoring people. In the South after the Civil War, they were still fighting the Civil War, a lot of them. They were very proud of their people who led the Confederacy and who were racist, and they put them in a place of honor. So
I don't think that the people who were Confederates were, every one of them are racist, the same way Northerners were not totally integrationist, They were fighting for states' rights to have the right to do what they wanted to do versus the country dictating to the state. But that's a whole nother story, in terms of...
They were fighting for the right of a state to own and beat and destroy and demean and kill human beings. That's the right.
I don't think I don't think that's the only thing about that, Bear. I think that might have been part of it. But keep in mind, there are many more, in my opinion, slave owners and slave traders, if you will, in the northern part of our country too.
Well, how much of a part of it would it have to be before you think maybe we shouldn't honor these people? Go ahead, Emily.
Just want to say that in Atlanta, in Little 5 Points, there's a sign that said that the square is dedicated to the war of Northern aggression. Okay, and this is still there, and they still think about it. One of the main problems, and maybe it's the good thing, is that we are a federation. And because the country is a federation, each state has a determination of certain things. And each state can determine, for instance, its educational policy. Hawaii, for instance, has one school system for the entire state. Now, because of that, our state could say that we must say under God. I absolutely agree with Rachel separation of church and state, 100% necessary to continue. I think maybe the federal government has to be stronger in a lot of things. You can't have each state making laws that countermand the other states. You know, when I grew up in Boston, for instance, the
I wouldn't have known.
you could
I
tell.
can tell you're from Boston.
Right. The drinking age was 21. And to avoid the drinking age of 21, all the kids drove to Rhode Island. Yeah, it was 18. Now that was ridiculous because they were all in car accidents on the way home. If there had been some kind of a uniform, you know, so I'm just saying maybe a stronger federal government, but with more just things would be
You
essential.
know, Emily, the federal government, or if you want to refer to it as Washington, D.C., the drinking age was 18, and we lived right across the river. The drinking age was 21. We'd go to D.C. all the time, you know?
Right.
And but that really wasn't federal government. It's D.C. It's like a, you know, now it's, you know, like a state.
I do want to say one more thing. Marty Walsh, who was the, you know, Massachusetts politician, he is now whatever he is in the cabinet, and he was in Florida today touting the fact that part of the infrastructure bill should be early childhood education. I totally disagree with that. And I know that I am a liberal politician. You can't keep adding things to a piece of legislation that's necessary to include other things. The infrastructure bill should focus on bridges and roads and then have a separate issue for early childhood education. They're both equally important, but if you can't pass one by including everything, I think, you know, look at the bigger picture. Okay. That's
Do
it.
you think that by having no faith in God, as far as government is concerned, that aligns us with, say, communistic thinking or socialistic thinking?
Oh my God.
I'm just asking. I'm not saying I agree with it.
Well, you know, I don't think that this was a nation, even though it says, you know, one nation under God. I think that we were founded originally on an idea of religious freedom, supposedly. You know, the Puritans came here to escape persecution, but they were just as strict in their, you know, Cotton Mather kind of thinking. We are a Christian country, and I think we have to get away from that. Pardon?
Judeo-Christian country.
Judeo-Christian, and we got to get away from it. We have to become, as Rabbi Barry has said, we have to become a kind country. And that's the thing we have to think about, being kind to others, being kind to the earth, and forget all the business of which religion you are.
Let me ask you, I agree. Let me ask you just a question. What if, I'm not saying I agree, I'm just posing out like a, you know, an idea.
Right.
What about people who say, you know, if we take God out of our country, then we become like a communistic type country, and we align ourselves with that. And then you have people say, well, I don't believe in God. And the great rabbi says, well, the God you don't believe in, I don't believe in either. So I mean,
Rabbi Frank, you're talking to someone whose philosophy is a little bit to the left of Karl Marx here. So
no, I'm just saying, I'm not speaking in terms of what I believe. I'm just saying with the people who think that.
yeah, well,
Let me go ahead, Emily.
no, I'm listening for
Okay.
change.
Let me respond to a few things. First of all, Emily, I have good news for you, because you said something like, you know, if some state passes a law that violates certain principles, it would be, the federal government needs to be stronger. Okay, we already have that. The United States Constitution and the Bill of Rights applies across the board in every state. So if some state does something violative of any of the Bill of Rights, violating freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the state doesn't have to have any rules at all. The federal Bill of Rights applies, and you can sue them under the United States Constitution. I've done it many times. So that you don't have to worry about. So if some state does something crazy, the Bill of Rights and the Civil Rights Code takes care of that. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention, Rabbi Frank's question about, oh my gosh, what's going to happen if we take out God from the kids don't believe in God, or we don't have under God, and what's going to happen? They're going to turn into communists. Well,
I didn't say
communism.
it like that, and I wasn't saying it comes from me. I'm just saying people that
Okay.
say that.
Okay, well, the people that say that. First of all, communism is an economic theory that's practiced in Israel. If you go to Israel, you'll see a commune. It's called a kibbutz, and they are communists, and they don't seem to have too many troubles, because all communism means is that we're going to share the wealth. The problem that Russia had and China had was not so much communism, it's that they wanted to impose it by force, indoctrination, imprisonment, and murder. So just the fact that you want to share things with other people is not the big deal. The problem with having kids say that they're pledging to the flag under God is that, first of all, it's a violation of the Constitution, because you're inflicting religion on them by talking about God. That's something that they shouldn't be forced or required to say. They might not believe in God, and that's their right. But more importantly, perhaps, is that some of the worst atrocities have been committed by people who think God is on their side. Once somebody says God's on my side, or I'm the chosen one, or our nation is under God. President Bush invaded Iraq. And the reason why, he said God told him to. He believed that God was instructing him. And once you believe that, then whether it's good policy, smart policy, evil, it doesn't matter. If God's telling you to do it, you don't argue with God. So and the founding fathers, the reason why they wanted to get God out of this is because they saw all this killing and carnage and pillage under God, and they wanted him out. They wanted nothing to do with God in the Constitution or having kids mouth the words of God. Now, one other thing I just want to share on this, and I have an article about it in the Jewish Journal 2 weeks ago, and I have another article coming out again, because it's one of my, I guess it's a concept that I think is very important. This is not a Judeo-Christian nation. This is a nation where the majority of people are Christians. It is not in any sense founded on Christian principles. And just very briefly,
Right.
in the Treaty of Tripoli, 1798, the United States signed a treaty and said in the treaty, the United States was in no sense a Christian nation. It was ratified by the Senate unanimously. The founding fathers went to great lengths to say, this is not a Christian nation.
Right.
And in Christianity, it says, obey ye every law of man or God. They believed in the divine right of kings. We revolted against a king. In Christianity, they believe that you shouldn't rock the boat and the status quo. Jesus said, I came not to challenge Caesar. It's a Jewish nation in principle. The words on the Liberty Bell are Hebrew. The words on the Statue of Liberty were written by someone who was Jewish. The founding fathers and the pilgrims saw themselves as modern day Israelites, and Jews are the ones who believe in religious freedom. So if anything, it's founded on Jewish principles, not Judeo-Christian principles. There is really no such thing. And that's why the state of Florida, which wants to say we're based on Judeo-Christian principles, I think is just a massive confusion. And really what you were saying before, Rabbi Frank, about say I'm a Jew, I think we should be proud that this country is based on Judaic principles and let people know it. Now, obviously, many Christians have adopted Jewish ideals and values, especially through Jesus. That's okay. But I think we should be pretty clear on Jewish principles and not muddy the waters with Judeo-Christian, which really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Anyway, that's my sermon. Go ahead, anybody else?
I mean, speaking with people in general, how many people, not a lot or little, whatever, people do not know that Jesus was Jewish. They do not know he was a rabbi. They don't understand that the calendar that we use every day is based upon the birth of Jesus, who was technically, symbolically born on Christmas, December 25th. And I say, well, if that's the case and the calendar follows the birth of Jesus, AD and BC and so on, how come we celebrate the new year on January the 1st, not the day in which Jesus was born. And they go, oh, I don't know. And you talk to a Jew, I don't know, that no one knows. Well, if Jesus was Jewish, which he was, the Jewish people believed back then, and even now, some of the Orthodox say that a male isn't complete until Brit Milah, which is 8 days later. If you counted out the day in which Jesus was, quote, born, all the way to the 8th day, it's January the 1st. So on one hand, our calendar that we use every single day is based upon the birth of Jesus, and we go along with it. But the Jewish calendar is even more profound. It's based upon the birth of the creation of Adam and Eve. Now, we know it not to be exact 5781, but the theory behind it, the concept behind it, is that humanity were all created by God as one, or created, if you want to use the word God, created as one humanity, which I think is a lot more profound in our, quote, Jewish calendar than our calendar based upon the birth of one person.
Thanks, Rabbi Frank. Harris, go ahead.
Wait.
Yeah,
Go
the
ahead.
biggest, Louis Farrakhan, this is for you, Barry.
Yeah.
His big thing was that the Jews started the slave trade. And you have a lot of African-American friends. Has anybody ever put him down that you know that was African-American?
You know, Louis Farrakhan has received so much praise and attention from the liberal community. It's scandalous. Women's March, they hobnobbed with him. Many people on the left hobnob with Farrakhan. He is vile, and he should be condemned. And what he's saying about the slave trade is a lie. The slave trade was mostly by Muslims, by Christians. It was biggest in the South, in the Bible Belt. There were some Jewish people involved, but they were a vast minority. Most of the people were Muslims and Christians. And what he's saying is vile. And this guy.
Do you know anybody that ever put him down that was black?
Yes. There have been black leaders who have put him down, absolutely.
Okay.
But not enough. Not enough of them. But and many of them praise him, and many whites, especially among the liberals, many liberal whites have praised him, and this is reprehensible. Go ahead. Who else?
Stan has been very patient. Stan has had his hand up for a while now. Stanley, go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to, we talked about tearing down Auschwitz, but we really don't want to do that. Has anybody ever been to the Czech Republic? And in nearby is a town called Terezin. And Terezin was a so-called model concentration camp. So you can visit that right now, and people still live there. So your neighbor could be a building that has beds stacked 3 high, where the Jews were stacked 3 and 4 high. And the neighbor lives right next door. I think that's unbelievable. As far as I'm concerned, why not tear that town down?
I mean, you find it to be obscene that people are just treating this place like any other place.
How could you do that? Live in a place like that?
Yeah. Interesting.
Let me ask you a question as a thought. How many people are there, whether it be Germans or whoever it might be, that are living off of, if you will, the riches or the stolen properties of fellow Jews? And we talk about, giving back, some of the, whatever we took or whatever we didn't take from the slaves. I mean, imagine 6 million Jews. There are 6 million Jews in this country. And if you took away every property, every stock, bond, or riches, if you will, or jewelry from every Jew in this country, that's almost similar to what happened in Nazi Germany. Where are all those items? Where's the property? Where is everything? The paintings, I mean, some of them have been returned, but think about it. It was a wholesale robbery, more so than a wholesale, if you will, anti-Semitism. Just a thought.
Yes, that's true. There's been very, very little accountability. And after the Holocaust, most of the perpetrators weren't held accountable, just a tiny handful of people.
It's
Anybody
not
else
about,
want to
it's
share?
not about putting them in jail. It's
Yeah, I
about, we want our property back, you know?
Go ahead, Harris.
One last thing,
Yeah.
why the Jews are leaving Israel. I looked at the prices of homes in Tel Aviv, and the average home is about $5 million.
Really?
Okay, who can afford to
Wow.
live there? It's a beautiful. My best friend lives there, and he tells me how fabulous it is. And I looked at, and I couldn't believe the price of homes there. If you get a chance, look it up. An apartment is one bedroom apartment's $1 million.
Harris, thank you very much for filling us in. You always
Okay.
have interesting information about Israel. I think I
Okay.
saw, did Wendy want to share some thoughts? And then we'll wrap it up.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
Wendy, are we related? Wendy Frank, we related?
No, you had asked me that last time. Mine actually, one, I'd be curious, when Emily was growing up, if they taught about slavery in schools. Because Rabbi Frank, when you say they taught when you were in school, they also taught when I was in school, and I grew up in New York. Harris says they didn't grow up when he was, they didn't teach when he was in school. Harris looks very good for his age, but he's much older than you and me. And perhaps.
Wait,
in
I'm
his-
only 86.
You 86?
Yeah.
You look great, thank God. Kenohora.
Yeah, so that's.
Okay, Wendy, I'm gonna be 80 this year. Not
So-
only was slavery not really taught in Massachusetts schools, when I was an educator, I didn't teach it, and I didn't have my staff teach slavery. We also did not teach about the persecution of the Native Americans. We taught about Benjamin Franklin and, George Washington and all the good things. We didn't focus on the negatives at all. So was that good? Not necessarily. I have a friend around the corner who grew up in Tulsa and did not know about that whole Tulsa thing that was, burned.
Wall
Did
Street.
not know about it. So, what can I say? My kids learned about slavery when they got to college.
Really? Well, again, Rabbi Frank, I don't know how old you are. I'm 65.
I'm 71.
Okay.
A baby.
You're in between, but I don't know if that's the reason that it was 10 years after Emily. If I mean, I can remember all of us doing a play and having Frederick Douglass, one character, and granted, Benjamin Franklin was, there were things of Benjamin Franklin too, but I remember Patrick Henry. I can still remember people's lines and who played who from 5th grade. So so we're talking back 55 years ago.
Wendy,
So-
I think it's not the number of years. I think it's what state. When we learned about the laws and rules, regulations, if you will, history of Virginia, it was a lot different than what it was a southern state. We were not a northern state, different than what you might have learned in Massachusetts or in
But
New
you're
York.
saying you did learn about it. Oh, but you're
Yeah.
saying you learned the Confederate side of it?
Yes,
Okay. I obviously was learning.
and
the
it wasn't a put down in a sense, learning about, it wasn't like Robert E. Lee was a bad person, or Ulysses S. Grant. It was more like that, fighting for states' rights, and the North won, and that's the way it is. And
Go ahead,
Robert E. Lee was a great general.
Mm.
So
Sharon,
I was
go ahead.
born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland. They also did not teach about slavery, the Holocaust.
None
Let's
of
see
it.
what else. They didn't teach
Baltimore,
about
even Baltimore.
Baltimore. Excuse me, Baltimore.
That's interesting because Sharon, you're about 10 years younger than me. So they should have been teaching it by then.
Right. And then
Let me
it
just
was
share.
not. It was not.
Let me just share something that's a good
Not that I
segue.
remember.
into-
Let's put it that way.
Maryland's a northern state.
Yeah, let me share with you something that's a good segue for tomorrow, because tomorrow we're going to be talking about this issue. critical
By the
race
way,
theory.
tomorrow, 7 or 7:30.
7.
7
And
o'clock.
we're gonna talk about critical race theory in education. I just want to share with everybody. If you take all the school systems in the United States, each one makes their own determination about
That's right.
what they're going to teach and how they're going to teach it. And then you have individual teachers who also decide where to place their focus. So yes, how long ago makes a difference, what state makes a difference. But the problem is there's not a uniform way of teaching things like the Holocaust, things like slavery. There's no school system in America that didn't talk about slavery. I mean, every school system in the country taught about the Civil War and taught that there was an issue of slavery. Now, maybe where in Virginia, they might have said, well, the main issue was state rights and slavery was a side issue, but obviously they mentioned it. The main point is, how is it taught and how much focus is placed on it?
Right,
What
right.
critical race theory wants to do is to make it uniform across the board everywhere, that you have to drill down into the fact that not only did slavery exist, but there are people, especially Black activists, who want to say this didn't just exist. This was part and parcel of America. This was part of the very fabric of America. America was based on racism, and the
Right.
racism was so integral to America. It's still here right now. It's still affecting us. And whites today are benefiting off of that. Like you mentioned, what happened to the Jews' property? Whites today are benefiting off of that with white privilege. And you guys should feel guilty. This is like the extreme view of critical race theory. On the other end of the spectrum, you have other people who are saying, well, wait a minute. Slavery is a non-issue. The Blacks, they came over from Africa. They were actually, eventually they were better off. Yes, slavery was bad, but all those sins are gone now. Now we bend over backwards and give them more than they even need. Now it's the other way around. And now Black people are getting away with too much by putting a chip on their shoulder. And enough already, I've heard enough of it. So you have these two extremes. And these two extremes do not talk to each other very well. They don't communicate well, and each one points the finger and says, you're a racist, you're a liberal. And what we're going to try to do tomorrow and in future discussions at L'Dor Va-Dor is talk about it rationally and say, where is the balance? What should we be talking about? And where's the balance? And if we're going to talk about discrimination against Blacks, what about discrimination against Jews and other people? Yeah. How does that fit into the equation also? And what about us? And one thing that I feel is so important to stress, there is no people that suffered more abuse and discrimination consistently over the years than the Jewish people, wherever we went. And yet we have risen to the top every place we go.
I think, Barry, I want to just say something. I think part of the reason of why we have risen to the top is based upon what's instilled in us with our, if you want to use a generalization of 10 commandments, but also keep in mind one thing, the president of the NAACP, when I was growing up in the 50s, was a white Jewish male, Kivi Kaplan, the president of the, now, if I have tried, now this is not a commentary on what's going to happen universally. I've tried to become part of the NAACP over the years. And I'm like totally, I can't be involved because I'm not, quote, Black. And who am I? How could you feel like a Black person? You don't have the Black, the woke, if you will. You're not woke enough to be part of this. But yet we as Jews helped form and put together the NAACP. And there's a wonderful place in Washington, D.C. called the Religious Action Center that was formed by Kivi Kaplan. The bill of the Civil Rights Bill, I understand, was drafted there. It was primarily created by Jews, the reform movement, if you will, to help uplift the Black people and uplift, equal rights.
That's true. And that's why Martin Luther King was a very strong Zionist and very friendly with the Jewish people. But Farrakhan and his ilk went the other way. Anyway, this was a good segue into tomorrow. Tomorrow's going to be a great discussion. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Rabbi Frank, thanks for being with us. Everyone else, thanks for being here. And we'll be here tomorrow at 7. We have a live service coming up in August. Hope you'll be part of that. And we have a lot more interesting discussions coming up. Sharon, when's the
Maybe I can
live
bring my
service?
congregation in next week. I'll send out an email for them to join in too, if you'd like.
Sounds good. Sharon, when's our
5,000 people.
live service?
Our live service is August 13th at 7 p.m. at the Methodist, First Methodist Fellowship Hall at 101 North Seacrest Boulevard in Boynton Beach.
Hey, thanks for a great discussion, everybody.
Nice
Thank
to
you.
meet you all.
Take care.
Thank you.
Gay gesund, Shavuot Tov.
Yes.